Hi everyone, my name is Jo and I am the founder of a company called Little Riot. And what we aim to do is we try and make technology more human. So we sell a product called Pillow Talk, which connects people that can't physically be in the same place using their heartbeats. So the way it works is each person has a wristband that they wear to bed at night and then a little speaker that you pop underneath most people put it under their pillow when they go to bed at night. And the wristband picks up your heartbeat and it sends the sound and the feeling of your heartbeat to the other person's speaker. So if you are away from your partner or your child, you can lie in bed at night and feel close to them wherever they are in the world. So we sell a consumer product which is now shipped into over 55 countries around the world. And over the last couple of years, we've also started working with children's hospitals. So we use our technology to connect parents with their children when they are too sick to be taken out of bed and held. So I actually lived in Newcastle for 5 or 6 years. So a lot of my business journey happened in Newcastle, so it's very much a pleasure to be contributing to Newcastle Startup Week and to still be part of a community that has given me so much along the way. So my business journey and my product development journey has been very long and filled with so many horror stories, and there have been several times or situations where my business probably shouldn't have survived, and I've been in the situation where I haven't been sure whether or not I'd be able to keep a roof over my head more times than I should probably admit. Some highlights include, but are not limited to, one year on Christmas Eve, my investors tried to close me down with absolutely no warning. There was the time the Apple Watch came out, which had one of our core products and breached our IP, but there was nothing we could do about it. When we finally did launch, we got screwed over by Kickstarter. So despite it looking to the whole world like we had run a successful campaign, behind the scenes we actually didn't have enough money to cover the cost of our production run. I was sued by a troll who claimed that my product infringed their patent for a sex machine. And I've also become incredibly ill, physically ill several times with stress and burnout. So I know how dangerous it is to be in situations such as the one many people are finding themselves in right now and the effect that can have on you. So I've been through all 5 stages of this week: finding inspiration, getting started, funding everything, growing and scaling the business. But the one I've faced more often than anything is keep going or pivot. And in reality, sometimes that looks more like keep going or stop. So today I wanted to talk about surviving hard things. I know how it feels to be a single founder, a one-man band, or at best to be a really small team, and when everything is on you. I know how it feels to feel like you're never going to find your way out of something, or like everything is about to come crashing down. And whilst this is my first global pandemic, it's not my first crisis, and so somehow I've made it through everything so far. So today I wanted to share with you 5 things which helped me survive them all, or that perhaps helped me find some light in the darkest moments. Number 1, keep flying. When you're training to become a pilot, one of the first things you're taught is how to deal with an emergency. And the number 1 rule is keep flying. If the plane's not under control, get it under control and keep flying. And that is the priority. Before navigation, before getting anywhere, the main thing you have to do is keep the plane in the air. So what does this look like when you run a business? The first thing I try and do is shed anything that's not essential. And you have to be brutal. Like any passengers that aren't essential, I'm sorry, but they've got to go off. Go through your bank statements. Look at every service you pay for, every monthly outgoing you have. Cancel anything you can, and everything that's left, phone up and try and renegotiate it. Ask for your suppliers for longer payment terms, because almost everything you pay for, if you phone them up and talk to them, they can reduce it or help you out somehow. So at the minute, a lot of platforms and services are giving customers 2-3 months free. Do all the small things because they all add up. Give up your office, strip everything you can back to the bare minimum. You're going to have to do things you're uncomfortable with. A few years ago, I got so incredibly ill to the point where I pretty much couldn't run my business. And the thing that I needed to do to keep the plane flying was hand over the controls to my operations person. And it terrified me. Relinquishing that control over my business and over everything I built was terrifying. But the alternative was me passing out in the pilot seat and the plane crashing. Your aim is to be as light and as nimble as possible, mainly for cash flow reasons, but also to remove as much pressure from yourself as possible. We all want to be heroes. None of us like cutting staff. We all want to do what's right, but difficult situations are hard enough as they are, and any stressors or responsibilities that you can remove from that are subconsciously hanging over you, some of which you're not even aware of, the more of those you can shed, the more cognitive space you have for problem solving. Number 2, get scrappy. There's always a way to do something with nothing. There's a way to solve every problem. Now, this is something that I've always believed throughout my whole journey. I've never really had resource the way a lot of funded startups do. For me, it's always been very much a case of muddling along. I hear people say all the time that they don't have the money for something, and like on one hand I get that, but I still think there's always something you can do to at least be making tiny movements in the right direction. When my investors pulled the plug on me in 2013, I lost my staff overnight and my product development completely ground to a halt. So I went from being a fully funded operational startup to having to tell my staff on Boxing Day that they didn't have a job to come back to and having my bank account emptied. And what that meant was that everything, all the running of the business, but also all the product development was back on me. So I ordered a bunch of electronics and set about trying to build a heart rate sensor. Was it fun? Not really. Was it efficient? Absolutely not. It was slow, it was amateur, it was frustrating, and I was juggling that with working freelance to try and keep a roof over my head. But it meant I was always moving in the right direction, and it meant I had some really ugly prototypes to be able to take to investors, to take to meetings, and that was ultimately what convinced my new investors to take a punt on me, because they could see that I was resourceful and that I was determined. And this scrappy mentality applies to everything: marketing, PR, hiring, content generation. You'd be surprised at how much you can get done with very little. When you think you have nothing, you always have something. You got to where you are because you've got an awful lot up here. And working within constraints can be an amazing opportunity as long as you choose to see it that way. Number 3, ask for help. Probably the main thing that helped me survive all of my business's worst moments was other people. There is so much kindness in the world, and people are so willing to help if only you give them the chance. As business owners, I think we have this front that we put out to the world. We need to convince everyone that everything is fine or no one will have any confidence in us. And we have this front that we put out to our customers, to our staff, to our investors, even our friends and family. To some degree, I think we feel that we have to at least appear to have it all together. But there's so much magic to be found in just telling it how it is. I have lost count of the number of wonderful souls along the way who have helped me get things done when resource was scarce or even non-existent. Suppliers have let me pay invoices late. People have let me work from spare desks in their offices. So many people have given me mates rates when I'm not even their mates. Strangers on Twitter have let me use their meeting rooms. And there's so much capacity in the world for generosity and kindness if you can be brave enough to put yourself out there and to ask for help and to admit when things aren't going well. You will be amazed at how many people and how many things will appear to support you. And the interesting thing is it's often the people you least expect. It will be complete strangers, or people that don't know you very well, or people that have never worked with you before that come to your aid, and it's incredible. And yeah, there's so much goodness out there, and I believe that as long as you are committed to paying that forward, there's always someone that will help you. Number 4, get comfortable with the worst case scenario. When everything's going sideways for us, it's really easy to get overwhelmed. The fight or flight response we have as humans heightens everything, and it's natural to feel that if we don't make it through this, then the world will end. An exercise I find useful is to write down everything that's a problem, and then write down the absolute worst thing that could happen if I can't fix it. Now, this might range from a deal falling through, to a feature not shipping, to ultimately the business not surviving. And this will look different for everyone. I'm coming from a position of extreme privilege, so at most points for me, the business not surviving meant that worst case scenario, I would have had to have moved home to live with my parents whilst I looked for a job. Now, whilst that's not exactly how I would have seen my life going, it wouldn't exactly have been a complete catastrophe, you know? I know that for some people it will be a lot more traumatic than that. If you are the breadwinner or if you have kids, there's understandably a lot more pressure on you, and the house of cards coming down could bring much deeper devastation or affect more people than just yourself. More often than not, when you really drill down into it, even the worst case scenario is survivable. And once you face that, like really face that, it moves from being a scary unknown to something that is still scary but is at least known. And so once you have looked that in the eye, in the unlikely event that you do end up in that situation, the very fact that you are familiar with it and have taken the time to consider it instantly makes it less scary than it would be otherwise. I read a book recently and it had a line in it that said, "You are not the things you do." And even after all this time, that line hit me like a ton of bricks. You're not your business. You are not just an employer of X number of people. You are not your product or your service. When we start businesses, I think we care about them so much that our identity gets really tied up in them. And whether we mean to or not, we begin to tie our self-worth to these things. The more comfortable we get with understanding that that is not the case, the harder we are to break. If we, God forbid, lose our house, there will be another house. There can be another business. This all sounds a bit negative, but what I'm getting at is that when we are founders, we feel like the idea of a business failing or a product not launching or a deal falling through would be the end of the world. And it just isn't. And taking the time to understand that, in my experience, is time well spent. Number 5. Trust your gut. This is the biggest piece of advice I give to anyone about anything. Work, relationships, family, personal, you name it. When I look back, with the glorious gift of hindsight, to all the times things got really messy for me in business, the moment of that first Jenga piece being pulled out of the tower was always a moment where I went against my gut instinct. My investment deal that went so badly wrong, I remember doing, I never felt good about that. And I let somebody who I thought was smarter than me and I thought had more experience than me talk me into signing on the dotted line when everything in my body was screaming at me not to. Similarly, all the things that have worked out for me, the craziest, biggest punts, many of which meant that my business did ultimately survive, have been the ones where everybody was telling me that they were too risky, and I just knew that it was something I needed to do. Don't make desperate or rash decisions if you can, but do always listen to that little voice that's inside you, because it knows when you should or shouldn't do something. This all leads me to the ultimate question we all come face to face with along the way, and the topic of today: keep going or pivot. And when it comes down to it, I think we always know. I think in every situation, we know whether or not we want to push on. And the way I tend to think of it is, does this make me feel like I'm expanding or contracting? The idea of stopping, even if it might be messy, does the idea of that make you feel like you're expanding towards it? Or does it still very much feel like something that's not an option to you? Or thinking about pivoting or changing your product or your strategy or your business, does it feel like something that is scary but in an enticing way? Or does the thought of it make you feel completely drained of all energy? Businesses fail because they run out of capital, but as humans, we can run out of emotional capital too, and that's okay. So as we get up every day at the minute and we look at the world falling apart around us, and as we ask, should I keep going or pivot? I think the answer is, And when the day comes when you don't want to keep going, you will also know. So trust yourself and be kind to yourself, whatever decision you make, whatever is right for you. And remember, you are not the things that you do.